Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. In this video I'm making myself a new outfit to use at Iron Age sites. I'm taking inspiration from this project from the amazing bog body Huldremose Woman. Now this is the National Museum of Denmark's webpage that I'm currently looking at, and today if you go to visit her, all of her clothing is archaeological brown. But there's been a lot of work done on her in recent years, and we now know that her clothing was once quite brightly coloured, and there's a lot of background research information. I'm not going to read this in detail to you, but she is wearing two main garments. There's a checked woolen skirt, which we think was originally blue, a checked woolen scarf, which we think was originally red, and the scarf has been pinned at the side of her body using a bone pin. She's also got two skin capes, one worn with the woolly side out, one worn with the woolly side in. Now, like most bog bodies, it's only the protein fibres that survive, but they've done some more research recently, and they think that she was wearing another garment that you can't see now. Her innermost item of clothing was a garment made of plant fibres, maybe nettle or linen. Now, of course, only a few very tiny little scraps of this survive today. I'm not going to make an exact replica. I'm just going to take strong inspiration from this, and I'm going to see how close I can get using materials that I can get my hands on fairly straightforwardly, and I'll also be trying to patch in a couple of those missing links. So first things first, let's have a look at materials. Choosing fabric for a project like this is always important, and the ideal is to have something that's made very, very similarly to the originals. Now, I've had a couple of lucky buys recently. These are both hand-woven fabrics. This one was woven on a modern loom, probably in the 1970s. It's just had one quick wash, and the pattern is not a million miles from what we want. This is my real treasure though. This is also hand woven, but it's also hand spun, and I think it's natural shades. And while the Huldremose fabrics today are archaeological brown, recent dye analysis suggested that the skirt was blues and the wrap was either yellows or reds. And I think this is going to work out quite well. In an ideal world, it probably wouldn't have these very dark lines in it, but I've just tried very quickly over dyeing a scrap in a blue dye, and I think that's quite promising. This isn't going to be an exact copy, but it's inspired by this one though. This is so beautiful. I think I've got enough here to make two of the shawls. I'm going to leave one in the natural shades. The other piece I'm going to dye with madder root. So that's going to be the real nod to the original. This piece though is big enough that I personally haven't got a vat big enough to do a woad bath for it, so I am going to use a modern synthetic dye for it. So a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm going to get this back in the washing machine with some blue dye, and we're going to hope for the best. So far so good. That's the blue fabric dyed. It's quite a nice slate colour, and yeah, ideally that wouldn't be quite as black, but it's actually reading more as a slate, and the lighter stripes have stayed lighter. So for my purposes, that is as good as I am going to get without commissioning a bespoke fabric from scratch. We've got enough here for two skirts. I'm going to do them in two different ways. One with the seams going down the sides, and one with the fabric turned sideways. We'll try that out once it's dry. This particular batch we are going to natural dye. So the first thing I need to do is weigh it so that I know how much mordant to use. So it's on the scales. This is the whole batch. It's 990 grams. I'm going to be using half the fabric for my natural dyed wrap. I want to use probably 10 to 15% by weight of mordant, so that's going to be maybe 75 grams, and I'm going to be using alum for this. First thing I need to do is wash the length. I'm going to do that complete, then I'm going to split it in half. I'll mix up the alum in a huge bucket, and because there's so much of this, I'm going to cold mordant it. I say cold, it's actually going to be hand hot, but I will then leave the fabric in the bucket for 2 or 3 days, turning it every time I walk past it, and hopefully that will mordant sufficiently for me to be able to apply the madder. So, washing machine, cut it in half, get it into the Morden bath. I'm also debating about the amount of madder to use. Now, generally with natural dye stuffs, the rule of thumb is that the nearest you can get to 100% of weight of dye stuff to weight of fabric will give you really deep colours. Madder has a lot of dye in it. To get a really, really deep, strong red, yes, I need lots and lots of it, but I will get really pleasant pinks, oranges, strong peaches, terracotta brick type shades with smaller amounts. I'm debating whether 100 grams is way too little. It's probably going to give me pinks or light bricks. Whether I should go for 200 from the outset. I think I'm quite tempted just to try the 100 to start with. I can always over dye it. So I'm going to set this up about the same time as I set up the mordant. So I'm going to get this into soak, let it soak for 2 or 3 days, then I'm going to bring it up to a near boil, give it a really good cook out without going too mad, and then strain that off. So, lots to be getting on with. I think I need to weigh my mordant next. Fresh out of the wash, these have been split in half. One half will be kept as is, the rest is going in the mordant. Now this is hand hot. You can of course use gloves, it's not a bad idea. You've probably noticed from some of my videos I don't tend to, but then I'm quite comfortable with the materials I'm using. Wool is going to go in, I'm going to try and get it in fairly evenly, give it a really good mash around, put the lid on, but every time I walk past it for the next 3 or 4 days, it will get a stir. Alright, a few days later, this has been stirred lots and lots and lots, and it has been rinsed. The madder I think is pretty weak. You can probably see against the light how transparent that still is. We're going to try it anyway. I don't need a really deep colour. The likelihood is this wasn't a pillar box red, it wasn't a really deep brick red. A nice, modest, attractive red that looks a little bit different from the undyed yarn will be quite enough for me. So let's get this in here and see what happens. Oh, a little bit of a change already. Oh, there's definitely orange is coming through. Okay, I'm going to need to stir that lots for the next couple of days probably. The leftover madder root is back in a pan having another warm up. I'll get another couple of extractions of colour off it, and yeah, next time you see it I'll probably be taking this out to see what we've ended up with. My current bet is a light orange. We'll see what happens. Madder really is a dye that just keeps giving. I've already done 2 or 3 extractions from the root. Look at the colour that we're still getting there. I think that this might turn out to be a rather darker colour than I anticipated. Hooray! So, several days later, I actually went away for the weekend and left this. Let's see what's in the bucket. Ooh, well, that's looking quite nice. Now then, this will become a little paler when it's rinsed out, but oh, I like that. Very, very happy with that. Won't know whether it's even until it's been rinsed, but hey, so far so good. I'm really pleased I only used the 100 grams of madder, really didn't need anything else. Fantastic. Well, it's had a rinse. I think we're going to have some more rain, but that's okay. A bit more of a rinse won't hurt it, but I am very, very happy with that. Right, well, that's the fabric dyed. I need to start sewing it up now. I'm starting to sew up my first version of the Huldremose skirt. Remember, I've got 2 lengths of fabric that I'm going to try slightly different things with. The stitch used on the original is really very interesting. It's a sort of wide feather stitch, I think is probably the best description. I'm using a slightly different coloured yarn to sew up with, and hopefully you can see what's going on. If it doesn't show up very clearly, I'll try and patch in a more diagrammatic version. So all you do is you take a little stitch in from the edge and you pick up the loop that's made as you go, so that it offsets, and then you come to the other side, little stitch, coming back through the loop that you've just made. They're sort of interlocking blanket stitches, one from each side, I suppose. This isn't the only skirt this is seen on. There are other fragments, at least, of textiles from the Iron Age that show this stitch. And whether it's done for flexibility or whether it's done as a decorative element, I'm not completely certain. It's certainly straightforward enough to do. The slight gap in the seam is unusual to our eyes today. It's very minor. I mean, you're not going to notice really when it's done, but it is definitely there. And if you were to hold that up to the light, or if I put something pale behind it in a moment, you really can just about see the edges and the little join in between them. So I'm just going to work my way along the skirt. I've just folded the edges in, and I'll leave those raw on the inside. I'm not making these too huge, these stitches, because I want this to be secure and practical, and not flash anything that's underneath if nobody wants to see that. And I will just work my way along. I think in a moment I might just do a few stitches in a lighter colour, just so that you can see the construction a little bit more clearly. Here we go. I'm just going to do a short section in white, which I'll pick out in a moment to show you how it works. So you'd start very much as if you were going to make a blanket stitch. Needle goes in, comes up through the loop that you've just made. Then you go to the other side, needle goes in, that's going to make a little loop on itself. Keep swapping sides, and this sort of interlocking blanket stitch makes this feather effect. I actually rather like this pale colour. I almost wish I'd done the seam in that for contrast. But there we are. Not to worry. Okay. That make more sense? Yes, I think it does look clearer that way, doesn't it? So think of it as blanket stitch, but you're taking one stitch from one side and one stitch from the other. Done in a dark colour, it barely notices, but you can quite imagine what a nice decorative effect that would be if you did it with a little bit more deliberation as a contrast. The skirt's coming along quite well. It's probably going to be a mid-calf height on me. I'm relatively tall, and that stitch along the sides is a really nice but subtle addition. Now then, I've had to make a decision about the waistband. The original looks like this. It's a specially woven edge to the fabric. It's very different to the rest of the fabric, and there's a leather thong threaded through it to allow it to be drawn up. I can't do that. This is an existing piece of fabric. I'm having to work with cut edges. So what I've gone for is a very simple casing. It's sewn on one side. I've folded the strip in. I've just caught the edge down, and that's allowed me to run a strong cord drawstring through it. So it's doing the same thing, but obviously it hasn't been specially woven to allow that structural element to happen. I don't think it's going to notice by the time this outfit is assembled. And I do have another piece of fabric to play with, and when I make the second version of this, I may have a little think about whether I can do something a little bit closer to the original. Not quite sure yet. I've been dithering about what to make the undergarment from. Evidence suggests it could have been either linen or nettle, and I do have some very beautiful antique hand-spun and hand-woven linen cloth in my collection. But I love nettle, everyone knows that. And this is Himalayan nettle, so not a species that was growing in Europe at the time, but it is also hand-spun and hand-woven. And as such, the texture is extremely similar to cloths that we know are around in the Iron Age. So I think for this particular interpretation, for the moment, I might go with this. It's a simple knee length sort of length. It's got short sleeves. I need to set the collar, ignore the necklace as if something else. I think I'm going to make the neckline a simple scoop. I don't want the underdress to be the main event with this outfit. I want all the woolen fabrics and the cloak to really take centre stage. So this one is short sleeved, it's relatively form fitting, it's a basic undershift. It's not going to be anything special. I'll just sort out the neck. This needs a few washes to soften it, and then that element can be added. This nettle fabric is fairly thick. It does soften up amazingly, but it takes quite a lot of washes. I'm just doing a very, very simple folded hem around the neckline of this. Nothing at all unusual. Another element of this outfit that I have to make a decision about is her fur cloak. So the original costume is actually two cloaks, one worn very side out, one worn very side in. And the outer one has this really very attractive contrast between light and dark fur. Fairly recently I've picked up these lovely vegetable tanned Hebridean sheepskins. So they're a naturally black, curly coated sheep, which I think is going to work really well for this. And I've been dithering about whether I try and get a pale sheepskin of similar quality to make the band around the collar area, or whether I just run with what I've got. And I think, given that I've got 1, 2, 3, I've got 4 hides here of similar quality, which is more than enough to make a cloak. I'm just going to go with a single cloak in one colour to team with this. I'm not going to worry about the internal layer or the paler part. Cutting fur is always a little bit nerve-wracking. I'm using scissors here and I am getting bits of stray fluff absolutely everywhere. I've actually been so strapped for time with other projects, I've roped Ash in to do a lot of the sewing for me. And he's doing a very, very good job. Thank you, Ash.
No problem.
You didn't know how to sew before you met me, did you?
I didn't. Not a clue.
He's actually getting really very, very good at it, and I'm extremely grateful to have the help today. Time to assemble the general components. So we have a very, very plain nettle fibre underdress, standing in for something that could have been linen, could have been stinging nettle. We've got a skirt, hand-woven wool, but not hand-spun in this case, dyed to represent the colour that we think it may have been, and a slight modification to the belt line to take into account the type of fabric that we had available. The shawl is one of my absolutely favourite parts of this. A lucky fabric find, hand-spun and hand-woven wool, originally in shades of cream and brown, now over-dyed with madder to a nice, friendly mid-orange. The original shawl was pinned together with a bird bone pin. I don't have a bird bone pin to hand, so I've just found a pin from within my stash. This has got a little hole in it. What I do need to do is put a leather thong in it, which you then tie around the shaft, which helps stop it sliding out at odd moments. Arranged like this is really practical. It does leave an arm free, but it keeps you absolutely warm, and the colour looks great against the blue skirt. Last but not least is the lovely luxurious Hebridean sheep fur cloak. All I really need to do now is try it on against a suitable backdrop. It's not an exact copy. It was never intended to be an exact copy, but it's taken strong inspiration from an original archaeological find, and as such it should be perfectly in keeping with some of the work I do at Iron Age sites. I had the opportunity to try this costume out at the Ancient Technology Centre this weekend, and this is such a wonderful site to explore different buildings from different periods and try out different costumes in settings where they would have been really, really practical. I do think I'm going to shorten that shawl. It's a little bit long at the back, but everything else about it is comfortable, practical, easy to wear, and I can quite see how the original outfit would have been really comfortable for the original wearer.